Nick Saban's role in college football is what? Fill in the blank for me. What is Nick Saban's role in college football? I want to ask you two questions about this guy. This guy. Nick Saban, what is his role? What do you think about him? What comes to mind when you hear the name Nick Saban? And this is like 4 questions. And also, how has it changed? How has your opinion of Nick Saban changed over the past 10 years, maybe even over the past 5 years? And I'm not talking about Bama fans. I know how you feel. And I may not be talking about Auburn fans, but pretty much everywhere outside of that, there's been a shift. I think a lot of you have noticed it. I've talked to several people about this, and everyone, when you start talking about it, they say, yeah, I have noticed that a little bit. So if you work in our business, to give you a little behind the scenes, there are some metrics that are kept. It applies to Oprah, it applies to Bill Maher, it applies to Sean Hannity, it applies to Nick Saban, any public figure. There are metrics kept, and it's basically a recognizability rating. Now, different companies have different names for them, but what they're essentially trying to gauge is when we mention you to any random group of 500 people on the street, how many of those people recognize you? And obviously, the bigger your profile, the higher your recognizability rate. But there have been things that have changed that should make it harder to be more recognizable. The first thing that's changed in just the American entertainment landscape is saturation. The other one is polarization. If you were alive in 1975, you can tell the story about how many options you had for entertainment versus what you have today. They have increased 5,000-fold. You have in the palm of your hand, if you have an iPhone, I have an iJosh, but if you have one, you have more in the palm of your hand than any TV set ever gave you in 1975. And even if you had the phone, it would have been useless in 1975. Well, the point is, it was a lot bigger to raise that recognizability score really quickly in 1975 because there were far fewer options for people to go to seek out their entertainment. It is extremely hard to go from scratch, to go from zilch in today's entertainment landscape with as saturated as it is and as many options as there are to being a huge, widely recognized figure. But he's done it. And the second thing is we are in the most polarized period socially in the history of our country. I think a lot of that has to do with what social media and similar platforms have given you, and that's the ability to really superficially debate. By superficially, I mean these debates are never tangible in substance. It's window dressing, it's icing, it's very little cake. But yet it still leads to a lot of people disagreeing on stuff. And so if you say the sky is blue, someone's going to say it's purple because who are you to define blue? And yet through all that, Nick Saban, in what is a polarized world in and of itself, sports, has raised his likability rating as he wins a bunch of titles. Now you tell me how that happens. And that, I think, is the answer to the change in not only his stature in college football, but I think his role in college football too, because he's done the impossible. He's transcended all of those barriers that kind of stand between someone and achieving mass recognizability outside of his world and also increasing the likability in the process, which is why I think he should run for public office, by the way. So I want to ask you again, what is his role? And what does he mean when you hear the name? What does he mean? Because that Q score has risen a lot. So I was reading Cecil Hurt's work, who covers the Alabama Crimson Tide for the Tuscaloosa News and does it better than anyone has ever done it, for my money. And he was writing about SEC Media Days. And he was talking about Saban, and he said, Nick Saban gets treated totally different these days, and has for a while, by media, by fans. When every other coach rolls into these media day settings, they're asked about the left guard. They're asked about, what do you think about your chances at the playoff this year? And they may be asked some big picture, overarching type questions. What do you think about the playoff? When Nick Saban is in a public setting, they don't even ask him about Alabama football anymore. They ask him about college football. He is essentially treated as the president, for lack of a better term, of college football. He gives a state of the union of the sport. And Cecil Hurt was talking about this a lot because he covers him locally. And so when they meet locally as the assembled beat in Tuscaloosa, sure, they talk about the intricacies of the team. But Cecil Hurt pointed out, he only mentioned 5 of his players during the entire speaking portion of SEC Media Days. Guys, they're replacing 8 on offense alone. Nick Saban mentioned 5 players total. That's how little the assembled media cared about Alabama football in relation to the much bigger picture issues that are on the table. And that was before the Oklahoma-Texas stuff ever even bubbled up. And so it's fascinating to watch because I've felt things shift on this in the last 5 years. I've watched Nick Saban and the way he's handled a lot of things. I think a lot of other people have. And I think a lot of people have seen the way Nick Saban has handled some stuff. And even if you don't root for Alabama, they've come to develop this appreciation for the fact that, number one, you know you're witnessing something truly generational. Something that even if you can't stand Bama football, you'll be able to tell your kids about or grandkids about one day. I think that the way they evolved on offense, plus what he told you was coming offensively and what it was about to do to college football, that validated. What he said was going to happen about the playoff, it validated. His warning about the transfer portal, it has validated early on. I think what he says about NIL is going to validate. The way he's handled discipline in his program, I think, is a lot more respected now than once upon a time when it was more misunderstood. I think when he went off on that deal, when they had the transfer from Georgia, Jonathan Taylor, I believe it was, and he talked about Muhsin Muhammad and how he handled him at Michigan State and what it means to give guys second chances and the difference between punishment and discipline. That resonated. That still today gets circulated. That is one of the best recruiting tools that I have ever heard, and he really didn't mean for it to be a recruiting tool, but he's also shown adaptability, and I think he handled last offseason in multiple ways as well as any head coach on planet Earth. And so I think a lot of people have gone from hating the dude because he wins a lot to accepting that it doesn't matter how you feel about him. He's going to win either way, so you might as well appreciate it. And then some fan bases out there, correctly, they look and they say, okay, he's the best of all time. We understand that. Nick Sabans do not grow on trees. But why can't we be a little more emblematic of what they have at Alabama? And that's made it uncomfortable. It's made it uncomfortable for a lot of places to look and say, it's Tuscaloosa, Alabama. This is not Beverly Hills. It's not like they just have the ability to print money relative to us. We have the finances. We can build immaculate facilities. We can hire the coaching staff that you tell us you want. It's just hard. When you get measured to that, it's really hard. But I think there's a lot of appreciation that I don't think existed. Even 5 years ago, I don't think it existed like it does right now. And it's always interesting because I've been in those rooms. You would be shocked if you sat in those rooms at media days or you sat in any kind of press availability. When he walks in the room, everyone tightens. Everyone shuts up. There are some guys that have to walk up to the microphone and say, hello, we're ready to start. Not Nick Saban. And the other irony is, in terms of physical stature, going to be one of the smaller guys in the room relative to other males, and yet he's the biggest dude in the room too. It's always funny to watch. I took a buddy one time who had a passing interest in football, but didn't understand the magnitude of what he was experiencing, and that's what gobsmacked him the most, was the respect all these people have, these seasoned, grizzled, veteran reporters. It's like the preacher has walked in and they shut up. Church is about to start. That's kind of the way it is when Nick Saban walks in. But I think a lot of other people share that now, and I don't think they did very long ago.